is the Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking nature versus nurture. We're talking going over cliffs not once, but twice. And we're talking the ultimate Canadian rowboat chase scene. And I'm Joe.
Damn it. I'm Trace, and I totally wanted to claim the rowboat chase, but I'll just subvert you. And I'll say one of the best uses of Moonlight Sonata in a film that I've seen since Misery.
There we go. Yeah.
We're talking What Keeps You Alive, everybody, which, funny story. So this just hit Netflix last month, I think. And so we've seen a lot of people in our Facebook group watching it and posting that they're watching it and offering their thoughts. And while this happens, I'm like, Joe and I are like in the background, like, oh my God, y'all stop it. We're doing an episode soon.
I mean, it's really good. You're all caught up. In fact, it's like you've done pre-homework, but also we feel like we often need to explain in these situations. We have not programmed something because we see people talking about it. We swear we had this planned.
Yes, and I will offer the same statement to a film we have coming out later in September, which a lot of people have also been watching because it has been added to a streaming service. And it's like, no, we had this scheduled already.
We're either behind the times or we're like forecasting, predicting the future.
I think we're psychic. We're just like with our crystal ball, like, ooh.
Yes.
But yeah, no. So we're talking What Keeps You Alive, which is written and directed by Colin Minihan. This is a rewatch for me. I caught this at its premiere at South by Southwest in 2018, and I quite liked it then, and I must say, I still quite liked it now.
Yeah, it's a nice way to close out vacation month. We thought it was kind of fun programming to begin with a ladies' cottage weekend and end with a ladies' cottage weekend. And they're both really good films.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because this is a film that I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it is pretty divisive, although I'm not quite sure why. Like, I've seen a lot of people really like this film, but I've seen a lot of people also really hate this film. And, you know, I feel like in those cases, usually I can be like, yeah, I see why. I see why someone might not like this. But I do confess that this is kind of one where I'm like, I'm not sure why some of the extreme hatred I've seen lobbed at this film exists.
Oh, I can 100% tell you exactly what people don't like about it and where it happens.
Good. I'm glad to get that insight, because I don't know. I mean, I do think it's maybe a smidge too long. Like, there's something that happens in the third act where I'm like, ooh, you could like either cut this out entirely or like cut out half of it and shave 10 minutes off of this film. But overall, I'm just like, I find the two lead performances by Brittany Allen and Hannah Emily Anderson compelling, and I really enjoy watching them play off of each other. But I will say that watching it last night, I kind of had this inkling, like this thought to myself where I was like, this is kind of like Jill Roberts given her own feature post-villain reveal.
Interesting. I mean, really, we're talking about an adult psychopath who leaves a trail of carnage behind her. So, yes, obviously that is who Jill Roberts is, but at the same time, you could just argue this is like the picture of a psychopath as an adult.
No, it totally is, but it's just that moment in Scream 4 when Emma Roberts is like, I told so many lies today, I was so good, and like, so you're watching Hannah Emily Anderson just go and just like basically tell Jules, this is how I was doing it all, this is what was really going on, and it's like, I don't know, like I'm a sucker for that, just like watching all that unfold and be like, oh my God, the mind of a psychopath. Not that I think this is a really deep film, mind you, but I do find it like quite fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and I do think actually that this is a film that rewards multiple viewings. So if you watch it, I think some people on a first time watch, they look at it and say like, okay, so I picked up on the cues pretty early on. She's a crazy lady. Like, she was always going to murder her. And you're like, Yeah, that's not meant to be a surprise, but when you go back and watch it a second or even a third time, you can really start to see all of the subtle cues that Hannah Emily Anderson is giving. Like there's all of these little nuances to her performance where they're easy to miss on a first time around because you're just convinced that Jackie and Jules are having like a bit of an off weekend at the cottage.
Well, and I think that Minahan's script does a good job of kind of priming you for that without giving it away so early with the reveal of the Megan name. Whenever Martha McIsaac's Sarah comes over to visit. But I will say that whenever this premiered at South by, I believe the log line was something along the lines of like, a thriller set at a cabin in the woods where it asks like, do you ever really know who you're married to or something?
Right. So it's cueing you pretty early.
It is, but like, I didn't walk into this movie thinking, oh, one of them is going to be a murderous psychopath, So
Right.
When the reveal happened about 25 minutes into the film, like I'm not going to say I was like shocked, but I was pleasantly surprised by it, where I was like, oh, I didn't really expect it to go there. Like I thought maybe it was just going to be like, again, like she had a different identity or something. Not that she was a fucking psychopath.
Yeah, and particularly that scene where Sarah does show up and she's like shrouded in darkness and you're thinking, who is this mysterious person who's showing up at someone's cottage in the middle of the night? Like it'd be easy to assume that is where the threat lies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it is not within the house, it is external. So I thought that was a nice change as well.
But on that note, rewatching it knowing that she is insane, you're right. I'm not even sure if I would call them nuances, because sometimes I was watching Anderson go and I was like, oh, she's clearly batshit from the get-go.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the fun questions to ask, and I don't know whether it's productive, but I'll still say that it's fun, is whether she just always planned to murder Jules. I mean, I know she talks about why she's doing this, but it seems like, why wait for the 1-year anniversary to do this? Like, if things had have gone differently this weekend, would she have waited longer and then brought it back like, okay, year 2 then. We'll do year 2. That's when I'll murder you.
There's a couple instances of like, a few plot contrivances or things that don't really line up for me. The biggest one of which is whenever Jules finds the box full of necklaces at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's, okay, so she's done this multiple times, like not just with one wife, but like several.
Yes.
But then you have Sarah come over in the beginning and she's like, oh, I just never see the lights on over here, so I'm coming to check on if the house is being robbed. So it's like, but we're led to believe that Jackie has done this to multiple women over the course of the past like decade or so.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really make sense to me, but again, like I don't really care.
No. I mean, you can hand wave it away in a number of different fashions, but yeah, I'm more interested in the idea that Jules is just the latest in a string of victims, as opposed to the logistics of how frequently Jackie is visiting this cottage.
Yeah, like I honestly didn't even need like the multiple necklace reveal because we already knew ahead of time that she'd done this once before. So the box thing just kind of felt a bit like, do we really need that? I don't really know, but whatever.
I think part of it is just that you're really supposed to realize, oh, Jules is outmatched in this case. Like she thinks, oh, maybe I can talk to her. Maybe I can fight her. And it's like, this bitch has killed minimum 4 people. Like you're probably not going to get the upper hand on her.
I think that's also kind of a movie that came out around a similar time was Thoroughbreds with Olivia Cooke and Anya Taylor-Joy, and it's definitely less of a thriller than this one is, but it's also where a character is a psychopath or a sociopath, at least in that one, and is aware of it. And I don't know. I like seeing someone who's aware of their disorder and like just fucking roll with it.
And in case people don't know the distinction, a psychopath is somebody who doesn't have any empathy or conscience. They can fake it, but they don't actually have any. Whereas a sociopath is somebody who's like, they just kind of take pleasure in fucking with other people and hurting them.
That makes sense. Okay. So yeah, let's kind of get this ball rolling. So What Keeps You Alive, again, it has its premiere at South by Southwest in 2018, but it gets released on August 24th, 2018 by IFC Midnight. It has a runtime of 98 minutes, and I don't have budget information, although I imagine that it's probably low budget, but this is a Canadian film, Joe, so it's filmed in your neck of the woods.
It is, yes. It was filmed in the Muskokas, which is a popular cottage country destination. I would wager that this is probably like in the $5 to $8 million range.
That would make sense. Yeah, it didn't. I mean, it did open in New York and LA. It looks like here, but it was same day as VOD, so I don't have any hard box office numbers either. Apparently, it did gross $20,000 in Norway, so good for you Norwegians over there.
All right.
The reception was mostly positive. We're looking at 82% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 6.84 out of 10, as opposed to a Letterboxd score from users of 5.8 out of 10. So it's a little bit less liked by people. But yeah, I'd say the 6 to 7 out of 10 range is kind of like your standard.
Right. I can definitely see this film playing better with critics who are probably appreciative that it is a smarter take on a bit of a familiar story, whereas I think audiences who go into this expecting something a little bit louder and bloodier might find that its emphasis on characters and just kind of calmness in between its bursts of violence, I think they might say like, oh, well, it's just not as exciting, or I got a little bored, I got a little listless.
I will say that for director Colin Minihan, he's done a couple films before this. This is probably his most mature film to date, and I don't think you've seen any of his previous films, Joe. I've only seen one of them. Yeah, he did get his start out as part of a directorial/writing duo called the Vicious Brothers with Stuart Ortiz. Together, they wrote and directed the film Grave Encounters from 2011, and then they also did a movie called Extraterrestrial from 2014. I haven't seen Extraterrestrial, but it does star the lead of The Den, so I'm intrigued, but my husband wasn't a fan of it. I will say the Grave Encounters is quite entertaining, though.
Right, and if people want to hear you talk a little bit more about that, they should check out the Patreon on the episode where we talked about Host and screen horrors, because you talked about that a little bit there.
Yeah, sure. I think I did that.
Mm-hmm.
Then he did another movie called It Stains the Sand Red, which actually also co-starred Brittany Allen, who's in this movie, because they are, of course, a married couple. They are husband and wife in real life. Which I actually thought was really interesting, too, because for this one, Allen also did the score for the film. This is her first score. And then we kind of get a little bit even more incestuous because, Joe, Minahan also co-wrote the movie Z that came out earlier this year. And Allen also did the score for that film.
Hey, there we go. But strangely enough, he didn't direct that one. That's somebody else.
Yeah, it was only a writing effort for him. And again, it was a co-writing effort, I think, with the director.
Yes.
But again, also more kind of weird incestual things, like Hannah Emily Anderson and Brittany Allen were both in Jigsaw the same year, despite sharing no screen time together.
Well, that's just a Canadian thing. That's like, hey, this famous film is being shot in Canada, and we're all part of, like, a small acting community.
I will, because you're not a big fan of Jigsaw, right?
I am not. I feel like it's a wasted effort. Like, if you're going to bring the franchise back, you should at least do something new with it. And it feels firmly in line with later Saw movies, which I did not care for.
I agree. It's a solid C for me for the exact reason you just mentioned. I think it's fine, but it does not justify its existence. But I will say that I think Anderson as the kooky mortician.
The police? Oh, the mortician. Okay.
She's the mortician.
She's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, she's like the bright spot of the film because she's kind of like into the whole Jigsaw cult thing, and she's also like just, your tropey weird mortician character in a film.
Right.
Whereas Brittany Allen is wasted almost immediately because she gets like one scene and then she's the one that like gets the poison injected in her and her face melts off.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah. Actually, Brittany Allen is also an Extraterrestrial, so that would make sense. I actually, because I just started watching The Boys this year, she has a 3-episode arc that culminates in her sitting on someone's face to death, which is quite fun.
Yeah, it's good times. I totally did not recognize her until you cued me that was her, which is ironic because she looks the same almost in The Boys as she does here in this movie because she's got her short hair and yeah.
Do you remember her being also in The Prodigy?
No.
She's the good dad. In the very end, whenever the kid goes to like kill the woman. Yeah. Anyway,
right.
Sorry. Not important.
Oh, The Prodigy.
I think it's fine. So yeah, not a ton of production information about this film. So before we really dive into the plot, I do think it's important to mention that this is a script that started out written as a straight couple in the lead, as a male and a female. And from what I can understand based on the research that I've done, it seems like the male actor bailed, or at least wasn't able. There was a scheduling conflict at the last minute. So they switched it just to be a lesbian couple in the lead.
Right, which is probably one of the reasons why it ended up being Brittany Allen, because it's like, hey, your husband's directing this movie, he's in a jam, can you come on and help him out with this probably relatively short shoot?
Yeah, and Do you have any quotes from Minahan regarding this change?
I don't have direct quotes, but I read a bunch of different things where he essentially talked about how he doesn't think it's a big deal. So he didn't rewrite anything from what I can gather. So he didn't really change much of the story to accommodate this. And he did that in part because he didn't want to make a big deal out of the fact that it was suddenly a lesbian couple or the fact that it's a lesbian who murders her partner.
I will confess, on the surface, when I first heard that, I was like, you know what? I get that. That I like that because it's kind of the whole idea of wanting to normalize queer culture. So it's like, hey, like this is a movie that is two lesbians, or that features two lesbians in the prominent roles, and so, but we're not gonna like it. That's not gonna be like what it's about, you know. It's not, oh, they're gay and that's the big thing, and so I like that. But I mean, there are flaws also inherently with that reasoning.
Yeah, so I think on one hand, you can look at it and say the reason that Jackie kills is not because she's a homicidal lesbian, which is the trope that we tend to see. And it's what got a lot of films where the killer is a cross-dresser. You know, that was a big deal in the late 70s and some of the 80s. And it's become increasingly problematic to the point where we almost never see those kinds of reveals anymore because the queer community gets really frustrated with this traditional depiction. So we've seen murderous lesbians and we've seen these like trans-ish killers. And it's just like it's played out and done, right? So the beauty of this film is that she's not a murderous lesbian because she's a lesbian. She just happens to be a lesbian who is also a murderer. And the film treats it very much that way. So I do appreciate that. Then you flip it over where you take Minihan's quotes where he's like, yeah, it's not like a really big deal. I didn't do anything that's really different. I think it's great that we can have these characters in here and just not make a big deal out of it. And that's where I also kind of like get my back up a little bit. And when I started to do some research into reviews, anytime I found queer reviewers, this was always an element of their reviews. So, you know, it was a fairly notable point of the production. Like, he was very frank about talking that, yeah, it used to be a traditional couple, and then I ended up having to swap it, and then it became lesbians, and I didn't change anything. And all the queer reviewers were like, okay, but here's the thing. It fucking does change the movie. Like, because all of a sudden we've got a very different kind of representation. So whether or not he wants to acknowledge that it doesn't change anything, for queer viewers, it's a night and day difference. Because all of a sudden we've got very prominent queer representation, and then we also maybe have this tired trope of a lesbian who kills. Which,
and I will confess, I don't really subscribe to that. I mean, like, yes, the lesbian who kills, but yeah, like, she's not killing because she's a lesbian. And so I as a, you know, gay man, didn't take offense to this portrayal at all. I do think that his quotes that belittle the idea of that it doesn't change anything. Because, again, I get what he's trying to do, you know? Like, it's the kind of thing, oh, like, we're trying to normalize queer culture, and so we're trying to make it be like, look, it's no different than the straight culture. The intention, I do think, is positive. The problem is that, yeah, like you said, that's just unfortunately not really the case. If you change anything from straight to queer, it does change it inherently. And I don't have a problem with his quotes initially, but it doesn't seem like I've really read much of a response to the criticisms to his quotes. And I think that's maybe where the issue lies with me.
Yeah, I did have a friend here in Toronto, so Joshua Dare, who ran the Queer for Fear program here in Toronto, actually really ended up taking offense to some of his quotes, and he tried to engage Minihan on Twitter, and Minihan, like, totally shut it down and was like, I don't want to talk about this, like, I'm not interested in having this conversation. And I don't know if that's maybe just because as a creator, you don't want one single aspect to dominate the discussion. Like, there's more to this film than the fact that it is about a pair of lesbians.
Right.
But there's also not, because if you look at the film at the end of the day, there's 4 characters in this movie. So the relationship between Jackie and Jules is all encompassing. That's what this movie is all about.
To play devil's advocate here, though, so was this like a public tweet confrontation?
Yeah. So it was one of those things where it's like all eyes can see.
See,
Which makes sense. You're like, okay, we don't need to air the dirty laundry in public.
Well, and that's, I mean, I think that, I do think that it would be beneficial for Minihan in general to have this conversation. But yeah, I don't really think Twitter is the medium for that, especially, I mean, maybe in DMs.
I mean, Twitter's not the medium for anything, let's be honest. If you
no.
want intelligent dialogue, Twitter should not be your go-to.
I have literally, I think maybe a handful of times have I had a productive, like argument on Twitter, I think you can have discussions, but I do think, I mean, obviously, and the people that were, offended specifically with Dare, about Minihan's quotes, it's a valid critique and it's a valid thing to feel offended by that. But at the same time, when you have that much emotion going into a Twitter reach out about this, I'm sure that Minihan was feeling pretty defensive. I'm not defending him either. I'm just saying I do get both sides of this story, if that makes sense.
Sure. And I don't think it's a right-wrong situation. It's just one of those things where I don't think that you can make a queer film and then not want to address some of those queer issues, right? And whether that was the right form or not, that's sort of semantics. I do think if you pull it back even further, there is this weird history of straight men writing lesbian horror. So we've talked about a couple of different lesbian texts, and if you want to go back and look at them, they are all written and directed by men. And again, I don't think that this film is particularly salacious. There's a hint of a sex scene. The women are mostly clothed throughout all of it. It's actually quite a responsible portrayal.
Yeah, the most, I mean, if you want to even call it exploitative scene with nudity, is the bathtub scene. But even that, I think, is shot very tastefully. And also, it's his wife.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing when you say, okay, so here's a straight man who's writing and directing this lesbian film that stars his presumably straight, we don't actually know anything about their sexuality, so we're speculating, but presumably straight wife, another straight actress in the other role. So I think these are conversations that are worth having, particularly as we do talk about how much people need both diversity but also representation. And I think one of the things that doesn't happen because of the rapid switch that happened in this film is that there is no opportunity to maybe make this more of a lesbian text or to cast queer actors or involve the queer community in the decisions.
You're right. And the film doesn't seem interested in addressing that at all, which I do think is okay. But I mean, again, if you disagree, I totally understand. But yeah, the fact that Minihan doesn't seem interested in addressing it is probably the real issue here. Now, and I'll actually even go back to something that BJ Colangelo had mentioned to me, and this is actually something that I kept in my mind when coming across films like this, but it was nothing about us without us, So this is a film, like you said, it's about lesbians written by presumably a straight man. Mm-hmm. What I do find interesting, though, is that one of the next films that he has written, which is coming out in September on Shudder, is a movie called Spiral, not from the Book of Saw.
Yeah, but a different Spiral, folks.
Yeah, it's a different Spiral, but it's a co-written effort, and it is about a gay male couple, and kind of there's a culty environment to it. I've seen it. Have you seen this? I don't remember if you have.
I have not, so okay. I'm looking forward to checking it out. I also think that, I think just seeing it from afar, that maybe some lessons were learned in between What Keeps You Alive and Spiral, because even the casting of Jeffrey Boyer Chapman, who is an out queer man, people know him from Drag Race because he's guested on the American version. He's one of the co-hosts of the Canadian version right now. So I think the fact that there's more queer representation and queer voices working on the subsequent film tells me that I think Minihan heard those responses and was like, yeah, I'm going to take these on board.
Well, and the thing with Spiral, too, is so he co-wrote it with a man named John Poliquin. I might have butchered that name. And I don't know if this man is gay, but he is a Canadian music video director, but he directed Grave Encounters 2, which the Vicious Brothers wrote but didn't return to direct. So I think it'll be interesting to see with that film, if like you said, there's a bigger queer presence in the film because of the actors involved. Mm-hmm. But, I do think it's interesting that he goes from writing a film that is unintentionally queer with What Keeps You Alive to a film that is intentionally queer.
Yes.
And that maybe show growth. But again, when y'all watch Spiral, y'all can see if it resonates better with you than What Keeps You Alive. If I don't know. We'll see.
There we go. Yeah.
But yeah, no. So that was a heavy discussion to get out of the way before we start this film.
This is true. Yeah, I don't think the film is quite as heavy as we've made it out to be, but I think it's just always a conversation I think worth having, particularly in newer, more contemporary films.
Right. I agree. So why don't we go into this plot then, and we'll talk about the film as a whole.
Sounds good. So the film opens with married lesbians, Jackie, Hannah Emily Anderson, and Jules, Brittany Allen, arriving at Jackie's isolated cabin in the woods to celebrate their first anniversary.
Woo!
Yay!
So it's first anniversary, and so they're married. So because I think I had always thought that they have been together for a year by this point, but they've been married for a year then.
This is what Wikipedia says. I don't know how explicit they really make it. Like, I was trying to keep an ear out, and I definitely heard that it was their anniversary, but I didn't hear, like, all the details.
Okay, yeah. Because I'd seen some complaints that are like, why would you marry someone so quickly? And, like, how could you not tell they were insane? I don't really buy into those critiques per se.
Those people need to shut the fuck up because you don't know what's going on in other people's relationships. I know people who have gotten married after a couple of months, and I know people who haven't gotten married and it's been decades.
Well, and I mean, we'll get to it later, but there's that dinner table conversation where Jules goes into like, you don't like, you hope for the best and you pray you don't get the worst, blah, blah, blah. And it resonated so much with me. Like, again, there are parts of this film that I was like, oh, this really hits me close to home, but not because of my husband, mind you, but just because I've had some toxic relationships.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, my husband's fine.
My marriage is safe, everybody. No, I actually think that Alan is a fucking star in this movie. I think Hannah Emily Anderson is having a lot of fun, and she's bringing a lot to the table in her own depiction, but for me, this is Alan's movie.
Well, I think it's because Anderson, though, she gets the more showy role, right? Like, she gets to be the psychopath. She gets to show more layers on the surface. But Alan, it's a more restrained role. But even so, I think it's more... Not that I want to compare the two performances because they're both so different. Right. But it's more understated and more quietly impressive.
Yeah. So, Jules explores the entire cottage in a helpful geographical layout of the space. Jackie wanders off. This cottage is great. I mean, to me, this is a real cottage. Like, it has the feel. I don't know how much they like dress the set or change things around, but like this felt very authentic to me.
For me, like, and maybe I'm wrong, but once you add a second story, it's not even a cottage anymore. It's just a house.
It's a fucking house, yeah. Tell that to my sister and her extended family. Yeah. Okay, so it's a great space, and it's very helpful that we've got this right off the top so that we just have a sense of like where things are, because we will need to know where people are running around at a later point in the film.
We also get Chekhov's insulin mentioned 2 minutes into the film.
Right. Which I think is also easy to miss, though. It's not like hitting you over the head like, here's a shot of the insulin.
I would disagree. I mean, I actually forgot how this movie ended, and literally when I heard the insulin line, I was like, well, that's going to come into play later. Like, literally whenever there's... It's the same thing as the asthma inhaler, right? So if screenwriters, if you mention insulin in your film...
We're going to assume it's going to pay off later.
Yeah, it's going to come into play later. We know.
But the problem is that if you don't, then it just seems like it comes out of nowhere, and then your audiences get confused or they complain like, "Oh, well, there wasn't enough setup there."
There's no easy way to do it. There's no smooth way to do this. Like, you have to mention it. You have to.
Yeah. Okay, so that night, Jackie sings Jules a creepy rendition of the song "Bloodlet" by the band Monroe, which is a good old Canadian band.
I was like, didn't know what that was. Yeah. I thought she made it up.
No, it's an actual song, and it includes lyrics that feature the words row, run away, and demon inside.
Oh man. See, okay, this is where it comes to music. See, like, I'm just like listening to the melody. I wasn't listening to the lyrics, so I wasn't like paying attention to that. Although her eye acting in this scene is very like her eyes are like.
You mean
vacant.
The lack of eye contact, where it's like, I'm going to sing you the song and aggressively not look at you.
Yeah, that's exactly. And this is something that should clue you in. But if you don't know going in that she's a murderer, you could just be like, oh, she's just really distant right now.
Yeah, because there is every sense that, Jackie is wrapped up in something by coming back to this cottage. It's why she hasn't brought Jules here before. And you're like, yeah, because this is her murder territory. This is where she brings women who she wants to hunt and kill. But of course, to Jules, she's just like, she's having an off day. All right.
Yep. I mean, again, if you're married to someone for a year, and also you've been with them for presumably longer than that, that makes sense. And I think that the people that might be thrown off by it, it's because we just met these women. We haven't been with them for a year, obviously. But I would totally buy that. Yeah, there's no suspicion on Jules's part here because it's just, I don't know. Like they quote unquote know each other. She knows her wife.
And I think anybody who's been in a relationship knows that there's days where you really connect with that other person and other days where you're just like, this is a stranger. I don't even know who you are.
Yep.
There's some weird shit going on. The vibes between us are off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that doesn't prevent them from making out. Jules is like, let's just put this guitar down for a while and let's just take off some clothes. But before they can get too far, they're interrupted by a neighbor from across the lake, Sarah, as you mentioned, Martha McIsaac.
Now, you know who this girl is, right?
She looks so familiar, but I did not place her, so why don't you tell me?
So she's actually, so some people may know her from Superbad, playing the other girl in it that's not Emma Stone.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, but she's also known for being the other female lead that's not Sarah Paxton in the Last House on the Left remake.
Oh, fuck, right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Which totally makes sense, because those are both, totally shot in and around Toronto.
Yeah, but again, it's like watching her when she finally gets killed in this movie, it was totally giving me flashbacks to Last House on the Left, which we did cover on our Patreon last year, and both of us really, really enjoyed.
Oh, see, look at you working in those plugs now. I'm so far, my sweet baby angel.
I do wish that she had more to do in this movie because I just genuinely like her.
Yeah.
Another incestuous connection, she was in a movie that I've never seen called Dead Before Dawn 3D, but Brittany Allen was also in that movie. And so I wonder if, that's kind of how, they all got involved with each other.
Right. They're all just kind of friends because they worked on a couple of movies together.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, particularly with a film of this size, you might call in favors or be like, you know what, this is a good opportunity to give that person I like a chance to work.
And you know what, Martha McIsaac, I like you, and I want to see you in more things.
There we go. Preferably not movies where you're just getting hacked to death and or raped horribly.
It's really I actually probably need to go back and watch Superbad because I really don't remember much of her in that movie, but I haven't seen it since it came out.
I mean, it's good. It's funny. It's all juvenile, but funny. Yeah. So this childhood friend refers to Jackie as Megan. And again, if you want to talk about Brittany Allen's great acting, where you see the look go across Jules's face, it's sheer what the fuckery.
Yeah.
But she doesn't say anything. She's just kind of like, all right, you know what? I'm going to deal with this later, but I don't need to do it in front of this woman who I don't know.
Which I connected with so hard.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm a person who in my younger days would absolutely have public fights with my partner, and those are embarrassing. So as I've gotten older, I've learned to not do that. And so if I learn something in public, I'm like, I'm going to keep that in my back pocket and bring that up later, hopefully when I'm sober.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you close the door to the cottage and you say, what the fuck is going on here?
But her response is, I don't even know what to say to you right now. And I'm like, you know what? That's also very, very
that
real.
line is 100% true, right?
Yeah.
Every couple has, I think at some point said, I don't even know what to say to you right now. I mean, the thing about this that didn't connect with me is that they don't address it until the next day.
Yeah.
I was like, I'd be wanting answers right then and then.
There have been times where something has bothered me about something my partner or my husband has done, and I don't bring it up for a couple days maybe because I'm just like, it didn't bother me that much, but then it kind of seeps in.
Right.
If this had happened though, that wouldn't be the same because it's literally your name?
Yeah, so it comes out the next morning after Jules goes for a run, which is helpful because it cues us to learn that she can run in the woods.
Yay!
That'll come important. So they head out in the open water in a rowboat.
Chekhov's rowboat.
Yeah, for sure. One of two. And I also like this because I remember when I would get in fights with my ex, I would invite him to go because he was very like standoffish. He didn't want to talk about things that were problematic.
Yeah.
He preferred to just not address them.
That's how I used to be, and sometimes still can be.
As somebody who just wants to get shit out in the open, let me tell you, it's horrifying.
I know.
Please talk to me about this problem. So what I would do is I would take him places and then we would be trapped en route. So I would then say, okay, well, we've got nowhere else to go, so let's talk about this thing.
That's how my dad gave me the sex talk. He told me we were going to Blockbuster, and we were, but he told me about sex on the road to Blockbuster.
Yeah. Because what are you going to do? Open the car door and just jump out?
Yeah,
you're going to have to sit there and listen to it.
11-year-old Trey is just fucking like jumping out of the car because I didn't find out about sex until I was 11.
You're like, Dad, no. Yeah, and then you just bail.
At the time, I thought sex was just kissing, so that was really fun.
Oh, wow. Okay. So babies are born from really
I thought God put
kissing.
them there. I grew up really Catholic, so I thought that God decided
yeah.
that after you were married, like after a certain point, God decided. So when people, like when I was watching TV and stuff and people were having trouble conceiving, I thought it was because God was like angry at them and didn't want to give them a baby yet, or he didn't think they were ready.
God. And the sad thing is I'm sure there's people who do think that. And
hopefully, if you're listening to us and you do think that, we've just enlightened you.
There you go. Yes. Babies do not come from God, nor do they come from passionate kissing. That's your PSA.
So that's exactly what she does. She gets her in this rowboat and they talk.
Yeah, they talk it out. So at this point, Jules explains that she changed her name after she came out.
And this is the thing this is really the only time the film really addresses like how being queer can affect you and your life.
Yes.
I do wonder how this played out, or if the name change was even a factor in the previous version of the screenplay when it was a straight couple.
Yeah.
I imagine it was, but obviously the explanation was different. But I like the explanation of it here. Like I've never felt the need to change my name, but this rang true to me.
Yeah, it also rings true to me because that is literally what I did. So
what? Joe, I've never heard this brand new information before.
So Trace is being a complete phony because he already knows this about me, but it's not something that I often publicly talk about. But Joe is actually not it is my name. It's my middle name, but my first name is actually Paul. And I changed it when I moved to go to university or college for you folks in the US. Mm-hmm. And I realized that the person that I had been growing up was no longer the person I was. And about a year later, I ended up coming out. But it was all about saying that person is more or less dead to me because I didn't like who he was. I don't want to be him anymore. And I changed my name to try to become someone new. And that new person ended up becoming a queer man.
But so whenever you start dating someone, or I guess even when you started dating your husband, like, is that something that you let them know right off the bat?
It's something that I often forget about. I've actually conditioned myself to respond to it. It took me a long time to realize, okay, you don't respond to this name, you now respond to this name. And it can almost become a confusing process, even though it's something you initiated yourself. But my parents and my sister still call me by my first name. So every time we have family gatherings, I always have to remember that my husband, Brian, is going to be very confused because they all call me Paul all the time.
Do you not find that disrespectful, or is it just because you've never made it a point to be like, hey, y'all, please call me Joe? Or have you done that and they just ignore it?
It's something that I allow for them because and this should be something that's important, like, because you raised it off the air, and I initially was like, no, I don't think that's comparable, but in this way, it probably is. So this is not like a dead name for a trans person.
Right.
Where, like, you have literally changed your entire, like, it's so symbolic because it represents a completely different person who you have always been. For me, this was more of almost like a semantic thing where I said, like, it was almost aspirational. I didn't need to, like, kill off who I was before because that had never been me. It was just like, I don't want to be that person anymore, so I'm going to try this new name on for size. And my family understands that, but it's also really, really challenging for them to process it because they knew me as that person for 18 years. So actually, now that I'm talking about it out loud, it is kind of the same, but I don't have the same issues.
I think, again, without... it is comparable, I think, but obviously, like, it's like in the ballpark, you know, it's not the same thing. It doesn't come with the same societal issues, I guess, that, I don't know. I'm trying to be gentle here, but again, I hope y'all understand what I'm trying to get across here.
Yeah, and yeah. Let's just say that we're probably doing a bad job of talking about this, and if we have offended anybody, we apologize. But
very much so.
The idea is very much that when when Jackie says this to Jules, it really struck me as something where you're like, yeah, you know what, that's not who you are anymore. A name change can really help to signify that, right? Like, you are not this person anymore. Right. You are now this person. So to me, I was like, I think in the film, it's meant to suggest to you, oh, this girl is shady. Don't trust her because she's just got another lie ready to go all the time. Mm-hmm. But as a queer person who literally did what she's talking about, I was like, oh, this speaks to me.
And I'm glad that you at least did that, so that way it would, like, to bring in that kind of insight. Because yeah, I mean, as everyone knows, you know, my Trace is not my name at all. It's my nickname, but I've always gone by Trace. You know, it's always been my nickname, so I've never gone through the same thing that you've gone through.
Mm-hmm. But, yeah, it's a weird thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it weird. I would just say, you know, it's one of those things, because I'm sure that you might have people that ask you, like, well, why would you do that? Like, why in your early 20s would you decide to change your name, or go by your middle name now?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just a personal thing, you know? Like, if I all of a sudden decided to go by Dennis, which is my middle name, I'm sure I would have a lot of people that are like, what the fuck, Trace? I mean, Dennis.
And the funniest thing actually is when people are like, oh, but you don't look like this person, and you're like, yeah, it's because I'm not that person.
Well, the problem is, I don't see you as a Paul, but it's because I've only known you as Joe. I mean, again, I found out that you were Paul in the past couple months, I feel like, right?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah. So podcast listeners, to say that literally I had a moment where he was like, yeah, Joe's not my real name. And I was like, what?
What? We were out in a rowboat, and I had given you this locket of a picture with the two of us in it. And then I told you I had changed my name. And then I hit you in the head and pushed you into the water.
Well, that doesn't happen here yet, because the movie does stretch us out a little bit longer before we get the grand reveal.
This is true, yeah. So at this point, it's still just oh, okay, but maybe this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So they decide what any two consenting women would do in a relationship. They do some target practice, where we learn that Jackie is both an expert markswoman and also terrifyingly intense.
Yeah. Although I will say that for being as good of a shot as she is, she's not later.
Yeah, she's a shit shot later.
Which in that way, I was like, well, I don't even need this scene. Like, I know it's supposed to be like, okay, cool. So she's grown up hunting, but literally, like, when it should be an easy shot for her to shoot Jules later, she's really bad at it.
This is true. I don't know if maybe it's just because she's been taken so off guard, right? Because really at that point, it's like, I thought I killed you. What are you still doing alive?
Or it's because there's still like an hour of the movie left and we still need a rowboat chase.
Well, there is that, yes. But this shooting incident leads into Jackie's story, where she talks to us and Jules about her childhood, and she introduces this black bear that's on the mantle and how she shot it, and then she went to go in for the kill, but her gun jammed. So she had to stand there and watch it die in front of her. And it's from this encounter that her father tells her the title line, which is, "You only kill what keeps you alive."
Which, gotta say, love it. Putting that title name right in there.
Yeah, but I also love that it's a different version. Like, in this case, her dad was saying, oh, we're going to eat this bear. It's going to subsist us for the rest of the winter.
Right.
Whereas in the course of the movie, like, the way that Jackie has interpreted that quote is, you should kill people for money so that you can continue to live off of it.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Bitch, no, get a job like the rest of us.
I mean, really, maybe the dad should have been a bit more clear, but I do like that the movie isn't like, oh, that's the moment when, like, you know, when she killed this animal that turned her. Because she says later, like, I've always been this way. I've always been psychopathic.
Yeah, it's always been, it's nature, not nurture.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so when Jules wakes up the next day, Jackie has gone to town, and Jules has a weird nagging feeling. So it's kind of like what you said, where she was going to let it go, and then she decides she can't let it go. So she takes the rowboat to visit Sarah, and Sarah's husband, Daniel, Joey Klein.
I do love that there's like 2 houses on this lake.
Yeah, it's a very secluded lake. I'm imagining what it would be like if this was more like Us, where there's just a bunch of cottages around the lake. It's like, can you imagine Jackie running around just like killing everybody?
Yes. Now, how was your house porn meter going off on this? Did you have a big old boner?
I mean, the difference in wealth between these two cottages is slightly substantial.
Yeah, it is. It's a great house, though. I hate that we only spend like a scene in it.
I won't lie, I actually thought that the dinner took place at their house.
Yeah.
So I thought we were going to get to see this property and get it a bit destroyed later on. So it was very weird to be like, oh no, we're actually just sticking around in the other cottage.
They probably only had that house for like a day.
Right. I mean, there's some good fiscal responsibility in the way that they're shooting this movie. Like, it's really one location and the woods. But you're right. They probably were like, okay, we need this other house, but it's going to cost us thousands of dollars a day. So let's see if we can shoot everything in one day, and then we can just let it go.
For sure.
So in Sarah and Daniel's house, Jules finds a picture of teenage Megan, I'm doing air quotes, as well as Sarah. And then there's a third girl, Jenny, who we immediately learn, and Sarah's like, such a gossipy bitch, because she just immediately goes, oh yeah, basically Jackie probably killed Jenny.
Okay, yes.
There's no sugarcoating it at all.
This is also not... It's not really her place. I think you can say, oh yeah, she was a friend of ours who died when we were growing up. But like, I don't know, like the kind of like, by the way, she also drowned and your wife might have killed her. I just think it's really weird that she never told you about this. Like that's so condescending. Like, oh, I think it's weird that your husband didn't tell you this, or your wife didn't tell you this. It's like it's like they're trying to poke holes in your relationship, which granted in this case is true, is valid. But I've had people do that to me, or like where someone will text me and be like, oh yeah, Andrew and I were talking the other day. And I'm like, I know. Do you think that he didn't tell me those things? Like, do you... Like,
he's having secret conversations without you.
Yeah, like it always rubs me the wrong way when people do shit like that. So this kind of got on my nerves a bit.
I won't lie. Part of this is that I think that Sarah had some kind of crush on Megan. Because I got a bit of a flirty vibe from her, and I often wondered when I watched this film, is it because there's something like Sarah wanted more to the relationship? And I get the impression that it was actually Jenny that Megan had a relationship with, and that's why she was the one who got killed.
I didn't get that vibe. I definitely got like Sarah was terrified of Megan constantly. But I can see where you would infer that. Okay.
Interesting. Listeners, let us know if you read a little bit of queerness in Sarah or none at all. Yeah. Okay. So Jules puts that in her pocket, and then she goes back and she goes on a walk with Jackie, and it's Jules' turn to be weird and distant and a little bit awkward until the point where Jackie just goes, what the fuck is going on? You've been quiet all day. And Jules is like,
did you kill that bitch?
Did you kill her? And Jackie turns on the waterworks and she goes into it. She talks about how she and Jenny had this competitive swimming thing going on, and then Jenny just drowned in the lake and she was questioned, but it wasn't anything serious. And oh my God, I can't believe you would think that about me, babe. Ooh, she's good.
Now, but this is what I like. I think that this, because I this is 25 minutes into the movie. I think the pacing has been pretty good so far. I don't think I was quite expecting her to like kill her right now. Like
immediately afterwards, they walk to the cliff and she pushes her over.
I mean, it's great. And she fucking like beelines for her, and it's just such a fast moment. I mean, this to me, like even if you kind of, you're like, okay, well, she's clearly insane. I don't think anyone was expecting it to happen this quickly.
No, absolutely not. Because you literally think, oh, okay, well, I guess Jules is gone now? What is the movie now? What does this look like?
Yeah, I literally didn't know what was going to happen.
It's a pretty great turn, for sure. So we follow Jackie for a little bit. She calmly walks back to the cottage. She burns her ripped shirt. She practices her 911 call in the mirror.
Again, it's like fucking Jill Roberts, like bashing her body into like picture frames and tables and shit, but like the non-violent version.
Yeah. I don't need to go to all those theatrics. I'm not a teenager. I'm just going to get a little hysterical in front of the mirror.
I get it. Her body is gone. Oh. And they also use all those jump cuts as she's doing it. Like, oh, I love using jump cuts for like the fractured mind. It's a really popular trope in editing, but I really, really like it.
Well, I like that this one we still have a bit of distance. Like the camera is placed at the door to the bathroom. It's not like placed directly in front of her and she's going all bejiggity-eyed, and like I've seen that too many times.
Yes, yeah. I agree with you. I agree.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
You're smart. You've watched a couple movies before.
Just, one or two. So, okay, so she's got this already. She's good to go. I'm not quite sure why she doesn't call 911 here, but whatever. So she goes back to the crime scene, and at this point, Jackie realizes, shit, there's just a bloody locket on the ground and no body, and Jules is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so then we cut back to Jules, and we spend a little bit of time with her, and this is where we get some crazy camera work. So Minihan's spinning the camera around 360. We've got a little bit more jump cuts, and it's really to represent the fact that Jules is probably pretty concussed and very badly wounded.
Yeah, the one thing that I really like, because there was a point where I was like, when it goes to the next morning, and I'm like, Jules, why the fuck are you still in that same spot?
Yeah.
But I was also like, oh, but you know what, though? She's really seriously injured, and I do appreciate that this film, for the most part, takes the injuries seriously, because there's so many times in horror movies especially where like someone gets stabbed or whatever and they're just trucking along like nothing happened. So it does make her injuries like feel very real, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I do think people quibble with the fact that she still recovers from the injuries a little bit faster and more easily than you would in real life, but I think the movie is doing a relatively decent job of saying, okay, she is quite badly hurt. Like, she doesn't move quickly for the rest of the film.
Yeah.
But I think personally she would just be dead after the first fall. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, it's suspension of disbelief. I mean, again, when we get to the second fall, you can raise that concern again.
Right. Yes. Spoiler alert on the second fall.
I do love this though. Like fucking Jackie walking around like, "Oh my god, baby, I'm so sorry," and like
oh, it's so uncomfortable, right? Because this is the moment where you could make the argument, okay, something happened. She didn't mean to push.
Yeah, like she just wanted to push her because she was angry or something.
Yeah, and then she looks up and she literally sees Jackie turning the concern on and off like a light switch.
It's so good. Like she's like, fuck. Like
yeah, like, oh my god, how much longer do I have to keep up this pretense?
I wrote in my notes though, like in all caps, I was like, girl, if you can see her, she can see you.
Oh, I
like
know.
that's how that works.
Yeah, like, you are also, like, she's up on a hill and you're down the hill, which means, like, she just has to look down.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of times where you're like, Jules, at least climb a tree or something. I know you're injured, but get off the fucking ground.
But again, like, imagine if your husband did this to you, right? Like, you're gonna constantly have those doubts. And I think in the early, at least in the first 3/4 of the movie, like, I find all of Jules's, like second guessing believable.
Oh, all of her reactions feel very authentic to me.
Mm-hmm.
She is not a movie superheroine. Like,
right.
she doesn't just automatically recover, and she doesn't turn into a badass final girl. Like, she is fucking up this entire movie.
I do find it interesting because, I mean, like, we get the kind of insight to Jackie's, like, changing her name because, like, she was gay, blah, blah, blah. The movie doesn't address this because, as we have mentioned already, Minihan wasn't interested in addressing it, but, like, Jules is the more masculine of the two women.
Correct.
And it doesn't really address that, and I think that would have actually been a really good insight to go into, but then I don't know where you would fit it into the film unless maybe it was a one-off line.
Yeah, it actually reminds me, you're going to think this is a bit stupid, but it reminds me of what happened when they changed out the Mrs. Smith role from Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the Brad Pitt movie. Mm-hmm. Because originally the character was supposed to be played by Nicole Kidman. And they ended up changing the fight scenes because they had completely different fight scenes in mind because they didn't think Nicole Kidman could pull off the things that Angelina Jolie ultimately does, because you just don't think physical prowess and like athleticism.
And Nicole Kidman.
Yeah, like she would probably be using household weapons. She wouldn't be, pirouetting over a couch and kicking Brad Pitt in the face.
Right.
And I do wonder if any of that happened in this film. Like, how would this movie play if Jules was Jules the man?
So,
and, would he still be terrified of his wife, or would he still be able to, like, fight back?
I do want to clarify. And so the killer was always the woman. Always. Okay, cool. I just wanted to make that. I wanted to make sure that was in fact true. Okay, cool.
Yeah, because this movie just would be gross if it was a man trying to do this to his wife. Like, we've seen that story a million times.
I think you can still. I kind of like the idea of it though, as a straight couple, as like a woman killing a man, because then it's like like kind of. But I think though the implication though would be more of a dumb man, like just flummoxed by this woman's beauty, and that's not the case. At least I don't get that impression with Jules.
It'd be a femme fatale, which maybe explains why she's the femme of the relationship.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's like a holdover from the original script. Who
Maybe.
knows? Speculation. So, all this to say, Jules spends the night outside, and she gets wet, and that sucks, but she manages to get back to the cottage the next day. There's this great match-on kind of action where we think that Jackie's lining up a shot. She's dressed out in camo wear. She's got this rifle with scope, and you think, oh, great, she's got Jules in her sightline, and it's actually just a deer. And Jules has managed to get back to the cottage and treat her wounds and try to find a phone.
There is this stupid thing where she's like, shit, my ankle's broken. Who are you talking to?
Oh no, the door is locked.
I mean, we talked about this in Fantasy Island last week, where it was like, you have like Maggie Q, like, oh, I have to get the pan from my apartment to explain why she's going upstairs to her apartment. But like, there's no real reason why this character would actually say this out loud to herself.
She just turns to the fire. I've got to go get a pan from my
Yes,
apartment.
exactly.
And the fire's like, okay, girl, you do you.
So it's like, oh shit, my ankle's broken. It's like, I just don't think that you would say that out loud. But of course, we need to know as the audience that her ankle's broken.
I don't know, just give her a limp. It's fine.
Yeah.
I see a limp, I'm just going to assume it's either twisted or sprained or broken.
Or show like a purple ankle, like put some makeup on it.
Maybe they didn't have the makeup budget.
Maybe.
Anyway, let's get to the best part of the movie.
It's so good.
It's so good. I remember this is the piece that everyone was talking about when this movie first became widely available. So, of course, we are talking about the cat and mouse game when Jackie pursues Jules across the lake in individual rowboats.
I mean, it is a suspenseful exclamation point rowboat chase.
Yes. When we say it out loud, it sounds dumb as fuck. And when you watch it, you're like, Jesus Christ, row faster.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. I love it. I love it. I love it.
I actually really enjoy how Hannah Emily Anderson plays Jackie in this particular scene because she's somewhere between a Terminator and an Olympic athlete.
It's also like there's a lot of comedy to be mined from her line deliveries. Like when she's like, "Why are you doing this? I just want to talk to you, Jules."
Yeah, and Jules is like, "Fuck you, Jackie! Stay away from me, Jackie!"
I mean, if I'm in this movie, I want to play Jackie because it's just the more fun role to play. But yeah,
right.
Some of those line deliveries, it's such like a gallows humor or like black comedy. I live for that shit.
It really is. And again, you think that things are gonna come to a head here because, of course, the woman who has not been thrown over a cliff and who is also in like peak physical shape manages to catch up. So she hops into Jules's rowboat and she's more or less ready to stick her with a knife until Daniel happens to see them, and then Jules keeps herself alive by inviting Daniel and Sarah to dinner that night.
And it's again because this is kind of a moment where it's like, I mean, I didn't know where this was gonna go. Like, I didn't know what was gonna happen, and so when she's like, "Don't say anything," and then she goes, "Oh, but tonight's good." Oh, it's. I don't think that this movie's firing on all cylinders. And I think maybe that's the problem, is that this kind of is the peak of the film. Maybe the dinner scene in a bit.
Yeah, this is where it feels like we're really ramping up.
Yeah, for sure. So, let's go.
I 100% thought that they were going to row over and she was just going to kill Daniel. That would be the end of it. Okay, but they don't. They go back to the cottage, and Jackie realizes that she's got to clean this bitch up because she can't have them suspecting anything. So they're in the tub, and Jackie explains why she's doing all of this. So she talks about the life insurance money, and Jules says, "Oh, well, I'm going to tell the minute that they show up." And Jackie just nearly drowns her.
Yeah.
It's rough.
The whole time I'm watching this, I'm just thinking to myself, like, what if my husband was doing this to me, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like 24 hours ago, you thought that you were just having a nice romantic getaway weekend.
Ugh.
And now it's like, okay, I'm dying in this bathtub right now. So Jules also tries to barter. So she's going through, I think, various stages of grief. And she says, you know what? I accept who you are. I can live with this. Let's just move away. We don't have to do this anymore. And Jackie's like, I've killed my previous wife. So no, I'm good.
The line delivery is like, I mourned with her parents, cried at her funeral. I'll do the same at yours.
Oof.
You know, I don't know what I would do in this situation, but like whenever you see Jules doing this, it's like, Jules, like, this is so obvious, like what you're doing.
Yeah, like no one is fooled by this. We've already established you're not a good actress because Jackie called you out on it earlier in the film.
They always say that what you want to do if you're like, you know, with someone who's trying to kill you is you want to make them see you as a human. The problem is, I guess in this case, that since Jackie is a psychopath, she doesn't see her as a human. She just sees her as like a thing.
Yeah, she is a meal ticket.
Mm-hmm.
She is just flesh.
Yeah.
So let's get to this dinner. So Daniel and Sarah arrive, and Jules, as we mentioned, has this great speech where she talks about their relationship, and everybody is kind of wrapped and engaged.
I have this, and I would like to read it because I thought this was a really, really, really good monologue. And it's delivered well, it's written well, but... So, yeah, Sarah's like, oh, how did you know that, you know, Megan was the one? Because we're still calling her Megan.
Yeah, I know.
She goes, love happens slowly for me. And then all at once, you start to notice all the little things, the good and the bad. The way they blink a lot when they think hard, the way they laugh at jokes that aren't funny, and all the little nuances that get under your skin. Like the way they shower for too long or hog the blankets at night. But it's the way they see the world differently that really draws you in. And even though you can never really know what's going on in their head, I mean, really know what's going on inside, you take the leap anyway, and you hope for the best, and you just pray that you don't get the worst. Like, that was also so insightful to me, too. Like you're with someone because they see the world differently, and... You know, you do look for someone, I think, who's, like, different. You know, that's why they say opposites attract. Because, you know, if someone sees the world differently, you're able to, like, experience things differently than because of them. Whereas if you marry someone who's just like you, it's just, like, I mean, honestly, I think it can get boring after a while.
Yeah, you're looking for someone who's going to challenge you, but also add something new to that relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think over time you hope that the relationship grows in such a way that you come to a sort of agreement or consensus where like your different ideologies can merge and you become better people as a result. And you just hope you don't get the bad one.
I do love the switch though, when like, because everyone's obviously really awkward and she's like, of course with Megan I got really lucky.
Don't mind me. My internal bleeding is just acting up again. So after dinner, Jules not at all subtly tries to cue Sarah that something is wrong. And even though Jackie is out on the veranda with Daniel, she fucking sees it. So she slits his throat, and then she stalks Sarah upstairs, and she brutally hacks her to death with glee.
And then there's that line, Jenny fought harder.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, ooh. Honestly, though, this is really Jules' fault. Because
I mean, it kind of is, yeah. I don't know what you could have done differently, though. I'm like, I was Jules, I would be like, I gotta do something. Like, as soon as these people leave, she's just gonna murder me.
But what you do is you say, hey, don't do anything, but literally the second you leave this house, please call the police. Like, please call the police. And that's it. Like, just don't make a reaction. Instead, she's probably like, look, she tried to kill me and I need help. Like, that's, like, there's a way to go about it. You know, you got to be smarter, Jules.
Yeah, Sarah doesn't handle it excessively well, but then also Daniel is just standing there like such a fucking man. What? What's going on? What? Oh, what's that against my neck? Oh, is that an arterial spray against the window? Oh, I'm dead.
I think that this scene, because it's really the most violent part of the film, it's really, really well done.
It's really good. I mean, if they didn't have the budget for makeup for other things and they had to spend it all here, then I'm going to say it was money well
totally
spent.
Fine. Yeah. Go ahead and say that your ankle's broken out loud. If it gave me this, it's fine.
Exactly. And honestly, I mean, I remember that there were stills from this movie that got released that I was looking at before I actually got to see it. And one of them was Jackie's face covered in Sarah's blood.
Yeah.
And then the other one is the scene that happens almost immediately afterwards, which is the two of them, like,
on the boat.
Lesbians out in a rowboat at night with a lantern. I was like, wait, is this a gothic horror? Are these two, like...
Well, that's the thing.
Here?
Like, whenever this was coming out, like, I wasn't sure what kind of a movie I was going to get, which I think is why, like, I was just surprised a lot by this movie.
Yeah, it's really good. This is one of those ones that benefits from going in cold and just not really knowing anything about it.
Yeah, if you know going in, oh yeah, two lesbians, one of them's a killer. Like, I think that really kind of spoils some of the film, the experience for you.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, by this point, it's like, cool, whatever, we're fully into it. Jules is fucked. It's just a question of what's going to happen next.
And so, yeah, we get some more comedic humor from Jackie here, which is like, they do the pulse thing. And then she's like, how deep do you think the lake is? No response. Well, I know because I looked it up. Like on Google, I guess, like the depth of this lake is there. So that's cool.
Sure, you can. You can definitely do that.
Mm-hmm.
I do love the fact that she also admits, she's like, yeah, the reason I looked it up is because I wasn't sure whether I was going to put you in the lake or push you off the cliff. You're just like, holy shit, lady. Like,
and it's so upsetting, but I love every single one of these lines. Like, again, it's not particularly like in-depth portrayal of a psychopath. Like, this isn't Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer here, but it's just like, I don't know, like, there's just something about it, both in Minahan's script and in Anderson's performance, that I'm just like, yeah, give him more.
Yeah, it's a good balance, I think, between the kind of tragedy girls-esque dark humor and the like, oh, I'm still deeply upset about all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my favorite line is when they get back and they realize, okay, well, we've now got to clean this fucking cottage up because we can't have blood. So you just see Jules looking like she wants to die, trying to clean up this blood that's just everywhere on the second floor. And Jackie's standing there going, I told you not to scrub. You need to blot.
See, I thought you were going to say when she's puking, when she's axing up the bodies, and she's like, keep it, this is on you, Jules. Keep it down. It's not going to get any easier when I make you do the next one.
Yeah. Also, can you imagine trying to axe a body apart with, like, broken fingers?
No, I cannot at all. So then we get this montage, and I have to say that this is like peak artistry for me. Like, it's all in black light because she has to see where the blood is, so she can like make sure it's all clean. Set to Moonlight Sonata,
and you even get a little bit of like, oh, this isn't extra diegetic, this is diegetic, and we'll talk about that a little bit more next week because the movie we're talking about next week also has a great example of this.
Yes,
but like, I love that she sits down at the piano just to kind of wrap things up.
I was watching this hypnotized. Like, I mean, again, this is, at the end of the day, it's a 3.5 out of 5 movie for me, and I realize I've been, like, praising it a lot, but I really do like this movie, and this fucking Moonlight Sonata montage of her cleaning blood to a blacklight, it's visually stunning, and I'm also just a sucker for Moonlight Sonata, man. Like, literally, like, you put that in a movie, I'm pretty much gonna bump up my rating a whole star.
It's a good music cue, yeah, for sure. So we get a little fake out dream sequence in which Jewel gets loose and she stabs Jackie, and then Jackie makes her breakfast because, of course, it has to look like she actually had breakfast when they examine the body. And at this point, Jules finds the box of trophies.
Yep. Behind the taxidermied bear head from earlier, again, Chekhov's bear.
Yeah. I mean, the bear's very important.
Yeah, it is important.
This is a Canadian film, Trace. It has to take place in the woods, and we have to have bears.
Yeah. Are there a lot of bears in Canada? I mean, I guess there's a lot of woods in the middle of Canada, right? Like, between the west and the east.
Oh my God. Again, this is a very big country, so when you say that there's just a lot of bears between the west and the east...
Between British Columbia and Toronto, and Montreal, which is further east than you.
I mean, there's a whole section of prairies in there that don't have a lot of bears in there.
Prairies are like a desert kind of thing, right?
Like wheat and corn.
Oh, okay. Well, there's prairie dogs. So bears and prairie dogs. Sure.
Let's just say that in Ontario, where this movie was shot and is maybe set, there are bears, yes.
Okay, cool. Well, this is the only bear in this movie.
Yes. I'm just saying, like, Backcountry from Adam McDonald is also set in the same geographical area.
Oh, God, I love that movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Okay. So Jules and Jackie pack up in the Jeep, and I think this is where people start to get a little bit anxious and feel like the movie is just repeating itself and not making as much sense.
Yeah.
So Jules stabs Jackie with a tranquilizer dart. She runs through the woods. She ends up right back at the cliff, and you think, okay, well, she's just going to push her off like she always planned. But then Jackie passes out because, of course, she's been tranked.
So here's the thing. You could have ended the movie here.
Yes.
I think we're like just under the 80-minute. Yeah, because honestly, when I thought that it was about to be over, and then I checked and I was like, oh, there's 25 minutes left. Like,
yeah, what else is there? Which, we've said is the feeling that you get a lot in this movie, but I think this is the part where people say this is a plot contrivance that doesn't work.
I kind of agree. So it does work because, again, we haven't mentioned it really, but throughout most of the film, we keep getting these black and white flashbacks to happier times. Now, granted, happier times is just them in bed together, like kissing and talking and whispering sweet nothings and whatever.
I mean, that sounds like happier times to me.
Yes, but it's not like, there's not a specific moment or anything, it's just shots of them in the bedroom.
Yeah, it's also, queuing up Chekhov's insulin.
Yes, absolutely. But there is this whole, once she passes out from this trank dart, and I literally wrote in my notes in all caps, why doesn't she kill her there?
Well, because as Jackie said earlier, your conscience is your Achilles heel.
Yeah.
So instead of killing her, Jules just drives away crying hysterically, but then she decides, no, I'm going to be strong. I'm going to drive back and face off against her, which is like the why. Why would you do this? Call the police.
The momentum slows down a bit. Yeah, she doesn't think it through. I can buy her going back because, again, we're getting those flashbacks like they're like really hitting you over the head with like, oh, how happy they once were and how believable this relationship was to Jules. And I get that. I do get that. From a narrative standpoint, yes. It really fucks up the pacing, and it's very much kind of this movie could end right now. Like, it just needs to end. And I think had this film been about 15 minutes shorter, I think we'd be seeing a lot more positive reviews for it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, because when you look at the complaints, people say, oh, it's the plot contrivances and the pacing.
But again, I don't think they come into play until this part. Like, nothing before this is really an issue for me.
I agree fully.
Okay.
So Jules ends up luring Jackie back to the cottage by hooking up some speakers and being like, hey, bitch, I'm back at the cottage. Come and get me. And then she's waiting with the gun. And I do like that Jackie is still a master manipulator. She's like, that gun's really old. You're just going to blow your own face off. So go, have at it. There's this great fight scene of which we see nothing. It's sound only because it's filmed from the floor below. And again, that's why that geography was important earlier, so that the camera can just track along. And all we see is light shaking and sounds being heard. And I think it's genius.
I really like this too. But that's when you don't have the money to do something, like maybe they didn't have a stunt choreographer or a fight choreographer, like you find creative ways to show it. And this, I mean, I think we already missed it, but there's a shot earlier too where Jules is like standing in a room that's filled with windows, and it's just the rays of light that are highlighting her. Like, this movie is so well shot. And what's funny is the cinematographer hasn't even really done much of note beyond this, so it's kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think technically this film is good across the board. Like, I like Alan's score as well. I think it really works for what they're trying to accomplish. It's just like, it's one of those things where you think, oh, I don't need to have $60 million to make a really good horror film. It's like, I can make it on an indie budget. And you just, sometimes you just got to get a little creative.
Yeah.
I mean, not to say that can't have more money and be creative, and it's not to say that all.
No, but I think a lack of funds forces you to be creative, and that's where you can see when a filmmaker is lazy or not. And that's why, in this respect, I don't think Colin Minihan. I honestly I compare him a lot to Mike Flanagan. Like, I don't think he's really up there in terms of quality yet. But I see a lot of inspiration and potential in his films, even in something like Grave Encounters, which I don't think is like, an amazing film. But there's a lot of creativity on display in that film as well.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely establishes him as one to watch. So I am actually very excited to check out Spiral because of how I feel about this film.
I'm interested to rewatch it and also see what you think.
Cool. Okay, so unfortunately, it is Jackie who ends up getting the upper hand, and the next morning we are right back at the cliff where it all started. Yeah. And I will say, again, I think even though I'm with you and a lot of the people who are complaining that I think at this point I'm like, okay, like let's just kind of be done with this. But I do love how this isn't a protracted, no, I'm going to beg for my life. We're going to draw it out. It's just like Jules wakes up. She goes, no, Jackie, please, no. And then Jackie just kicks her off the cliff.
Yeah. It's a back and forth with me on this ending, I'm sorry, this third act, really, where it's like, okay, let's go. Oh, that's good. Okay, let's go. Oh, that's really good. Like that's I was going through a lot of whiplash watching this.
Yeah. So this is the good whiplash.
Yeah.
So now the practice 911 call gets to pay off because, of course, Jackie makes the call. And as she kind of readies for the authorities to arrive, this is where we get the extended black and white flashback where it is, of course, confirmed Jackie is diabetic, so hey, that insulin has become important. She flips open a computer because she's feeling a little bit dizzy and discombobulated, and Jules has left her a videotape fuck you message.
I love it, but this is a huge contrivance because she's really fucking lucky Jackie didn't watch that video before giving herself her shot.
I got the impression that at this point, no, I guess that wouldn't make sense. I was gonna say I think she's been giving her the wrong shot all along, but no, that wouldn't make sense, would it?
No. It's this, like, she gives herself the shot, feels woozy, and then goes to the computer, which I'm assuming the idea was to Google, why would I feel woozy after giving myself an insulin shot?
Maybe, yeah. WebMD, I'm feeling these symptoms. Am I a hypochondriac or a psychopath?
But it is a really, really good sequence. And, like, when you see the realization on her face, and, like, when she's like, you know what happens when you inject hydrogen peroxide? It forms blood clots.
Yeah, I mean, that is not fucking around. That is not, oh, I just gave you something to make you feel icky and you're gonna die in 20 years. It's like, I've given you something and you're gonna die pretty fucking soon.
And I didn't mention that Minihan does pull triple duty because he's also the editor on this film. I do love the editing during her stroke scene because it's paired with the shots of her as a child who's like shooting a deer or whatever. And it's like when the child shoots the deer, it cuts, and it's when the stroke hits her as she's running slow motion through the field.
Yeah.
It's a bit melodramatic, but I kind of, it works for me.
It also works for me. Yeah. I also like this idea that, we're paying off a lot of things. Like we joked that, oh, the insulin has to come back. But I do like the fact that we're also paying off that story where she has to stand there and watch the bear die. And then we get this idea that her younger self is now also watching her adult self die.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
I really enjoy it a lot. And so again, it makes kind of like the sluggish pace and like some of the stupid contrivances from the past 15, 20 minutes a bit worth it because the catharsis in this scene is quite good.
Yeah, if you can't get over the idea that Jules would come back for this final confrontation, I don't think any of this stuff will work. But if you can be like, meh, I don't love it, but there's a lot of good stuff that happens after the fact, then I think this movie holds up a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So we're more or less done. Jackie is dead, and then we go back to the cliff and we see Jules's body, and her eyes are open. She's not moving. She seems to be dead. And then the screen fades to black, and there's
no. Sorry, it doesn't fade to black. It pans up, so we're essentially seeing like Jules's POV at the skyline of the trees, and it holds there for like 15 seconds, I think, before we get that breath, and then it cuts to black. This is where we can talk about, like, is she alive? Like, would she really be alive?
No.
I think she's pretty much gonna die no matter what, because, like, there's no one there.
But the cops are on their way.
Yeah, they called the cops.
And she told her she's at the base of the cliff.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, you know what? So, hey, do we like the pseudo-happy ending, or or were you like, no?
I want them both dead.
Wow, okay.
Not because I don't like the characters. I just think, like, her surviving once was enough for me. I kind of like the idea, and I think in part because this actually reminds me of a Christopher Pike novel called Fall into Darkness, where a girl literally falls off a cliff, but she faked her death. But, like, she ends up actually dying later because, like, this is not the kind of thing that you can just survive. It ends up catching up to you.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, no, I mean, as a whole, I still think this is a really, really good film. I waver between just bumping it up to a 4 out of 5 because I still really liked it, flaws and all. But yeah, I think this is great. I'm interested to hear from our listeners now that we can finally jump into conversation, since obviously, we've done this episode now. But yeah, like, I mean, what worked for you and what didn't? Or is it pretty much the things we said that didn't bother us as much that did bother you more? I'm quite curious.
Yeah, I think I'm also interested to hear from people who have only seen this once compared to at least twice, and whether you feel like you're more generous to some of the plot contrivances, or if they're still like, no, I can't get over it.
Yeah, and I think it's fair if you can't get over it. I mean, I think for me, I've seen films with way worse plot contrivances, so I'm just like, this is not like movie ruining for me.
Yeah, I think it almost would have worked for me just a smidget better if when she actually gets Jackie at gunpoint and Jackie says like, oh, you just had to come back for closure, or like, you're trying to prove me wrong, oh, you gave up your conscience or something. Like, maybe it's a little bit too heavy-handed from a scripting point of view, but I think it might have gone a little bit to address some of the people saying, well, why the fuck would Jules come back? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, let us know, everyone. I've actually really enjoyed revisiting this, so go us.
Yay us and yay Canadian horror.
Honestly, I feel like if we went really down the line, I feel like at least half the films we've covered have been Canadian in some shape, way, or form.
Well, if you count just shot in Canada and or starring mostly secondary characters who are Canadian, then yeah, it's a lot. But it's just a geographical proximity thing.
Yeah. Well, okay, that'll wrap that up. So before we announce what we're covering next week, we'll just go through some typical housekeeping. If you want to get in touch, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers, and join our Facebook Horror Queers group to hang out with other listeners. If you have a moment, please rate and review us on the podcatcher of your choice. If you would like Horror Queers merch, check out our store at teepublic.com. Just search Horror Queers on teepublic.com. And if you want even more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. This month, we're pretty much almost done, but we've got new episodes on Random Acts of Violence and Deep Blue Sea 3, as well as audio commentaries on The Cabin in the Woods and the first Deep Blue Sea. We do have an exciting September lined up. We'll announce that next week in our episode on... Joe, what is our episode on next week?
Well, this has been a lovely vacation month, Trace, but I'm not quite ready to give it up just because we're headed into September. So I've booked us first-class tickets with Peter Neal, noted mystery author. We're headed to Rome because we're going to talk about Tenebrae.
Tenebrae, a.k.a. the only giallo I've seen that I've liked.
Yes, and our very first Dario Argento film.
I'm surprised it's taken us that long to get there. We do have a special returning guest next week as well, so y'all be sure to check that out. Tenebrae is streaming on Shudder, so y'all can watch it there. And also, in a weird coincidence that we did not plan, it does play very well as a companion to Random Acts of Violence, which as I mentioned before, we're covering on the Patreon, if only because it deals with similar themes of art inspirating life or life inspirating art. I don't know, one of those things.
Yes, and I just feel like I can't help but, mention inspirating is not a word.
Sure.
Inspiring.
Inspiring. It's really, it's been a long day.
I was going to say, you know what? I don't need to be that dick because you could do that to me every other sentence.
No, I think you do, because otherwise it's going to be a bunch of our listeners yelling at me in their cars going, what, is he an idiot? I don't want people to think I'm an idiot.
No, you know what? It's our new t-shirt. It's hashtag inspirating.
Anyway, on that note, we can cross out what keeps you alive.
Yes, and cross out horror queers.
Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network, home of creepy, disturbing, and terrifying creepypastas, SCP archives, weekly full-cast storytelling, horror queers, genre commentary from an LGBTQ perspective, and the Boo Crew, horror-centric interviews. Listen free wherever you stream audio and at bloodydisgusting.com/podcasts.
It was late in the afternoon when the Professor and I took our way towards the east, whence I knew Jonathan was coming.
Jonathan Harker has asked me to note this, as he says he is hardly equal to the task, and he wants an exact record kept.
Dear Madam Mina, I have read your husband's so wonderful diary. Strange and terrible as it is true. I will pledge my life on it.
God preserve my sanity, for to this I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past.
I am in hopes that I shall see more of you at Castle Dracula.
Listen to Regarding Dracula wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us online at bloody.fm.